5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special interview pod of Point to the Spot, a US-based podcast focusing on the world of football. And we are truly focusing on the world of football today, and specifically Caribbean football. And we are excited to have on the show the first transnational podcast that we've ever had. Joining us from just outside Birmingham, England, Nathan Carr is creator and writer for The Home of Caribbean Football, which is an independent website dedicated to all things Caribbean soccer. Nathan, thanks for joining us, man.
No, thank you very much for having me on the show, guys. Looking forward to it.
And so if you haven't, you should go check out our previous podcast with Cesar Hernandez, where we looked at Liga MX. And so we're kind of expanding the look at soccer throughout North America here. And Nathan, just out of curiosity, to start off with, how did you get into covering Caribbean football? Because that's something that I think I don't really, my mind doesn't jump to necessarily. And when I think about North American soccer, and I don't know, I think a lot of our listeners probably the same way.
Yeah, no, it's a question that I get asked a fair bit, to be honest, Andrew. My kind of story is that I started blogging about football generally around 14. When I was around 14, and there was a lot, because I'm from the UK, there was quite a lot of mainstream content out there, and I just wanted to follow something that was a little bit more different, I suppose you could say, and explore football in a different part of the world. So I remember I began researching into the Caribbean, and kind of soon I realised that there was very little online or print coverage of Caribbean football. So I started researching and was just fascinated by the diversity and the exotic nature of the islands, because the Caribbean is such a diverse region. You know, you've got the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, French-speaking, English-speaking, Dutch-speaking. Set up my website, The Home of Caribbean Football, and 5 years down the line, continuing to follow it. Very, very passionate about the growth of it. I think, you know, there's a lot of talent in the Caribbean that often kind of doesn't get the recognition that I think it deserves. Whenever I'm kind of given an opportunity to talk about it, always leap at the chance.
Awesome. Well, I hope to get back to kind of looking at some of that young talent later in the pod, but you know, none of us know, I think I can speak on behalf of the three of us, where I don't think we know too much about Caribbean football. Jack shaking his head. And I don't think our listeners do either. So kind of starting off with, what either competitions or players or storylines do you think that like Americans who are looking to start following Caribbean football should be paying attention to?
I mean, it's quite a broad question, I guess. At the moment, there are kind of two big things which are surrounding Caribbean football, I'd say. The first one is there's been talk, which began in January of this year, about a potential Caribbean split from CONCACAF. So for any listeners that don't know, CONCACAF has 41 member associations, and the Caribbean makes up 31 of those. So it's quite a big share in the membership. And there's been talk of that happening. Why is the talk of this? Basically, obviously, you guys know that the World Cup has been expanded to 48 teams for 2026. And also, there's this sense that CONCACAF are kind of taking a bit more control over the Caribbean, because obviously, for a long time, the Caribbean Football Union, which was established in the late 70s, that has obviously been kind of dominated by Jack Warner, who was in charge of the Caribbean for 28 years. And then latterly, Jeffrey Webb, and we all know what happened there. The Caribbean split is quite a big thing at the moment, although Montegliani and co have kind of shot it down at the moment. And also the League of Nations, which has just come out, quite a big storyline. CONCACAF held a congress in Aruba yesterday, and it hasn't really gone down very well, this concept with US fans, but the League of Nations is looking to copy what UEFA have just brought about, a Nations League, which would essentially replace friendly matches throughout the calendar year. And for me, this would benefit smaller, less active Caribbean islands a lot more than it would the North American bloc, i.e. the US, Mexico, Canada, because ultimately a lot of countries in the Caribbean I'm talking Montserrat, the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos Islands, British Virgin Islands, and so on. They do not play enough regular games throughout the calendar year, and it hurts their development. They just can't build any momentum. So the League of Nations is something that CONCACAF are looking to implement and bring about, I think, for next year, which might have a positive effect. So yeah, as I said before, though, Caribbean football, it's very diverse. It's kind of split up into Spanish speaking, so Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic. You have the French islands like Martinique, Guadeloupe, a lot of Anglophone speaking from colonialism from times gone by, and Dutch speaking as well. This is a region that gave us Clarence Seedorf, Edgar Davids, Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank, so from Suriname. So it's very, very diverse, and that's what I love about it, really.
Jack or Reed, you guys have anything?
Yeah, so I've looked into it a little bit. The Caribbean Cup is coming up, right? They're going to play it in June, and the semifinals. They've had all the qualifying. We've got Jamaica playing against French Guyana,
yeah.
Curacao, and then Martinique. Who do you pick, or who do you peg to win the tournament this year?
I think the final will be Jamaica-Curacao. Jamaica are the defending champions, having won it in 2014. That was their 6th title. But for me, I think it will be Jamaica and Curacao. Jamaica, as I said, defending champions, very strong traditional powerhouse in Caribbean football. Curacao are up and coming. They're really worth paying attention to at the moment. Patrick Kluivert was in charge of them for around a year. And obviously now he's at PSG, but they've recruited a lot from the Dutch leagues because they've been recruiting from the diaspora in the Netherlands. They've got strong ties there. Martinique and French Guyana are actually non-FIFA members, which if you think about it, kind of makes their progress kind of even more impressive. French Guyana will be making their debut at the Gold Cup, so too will Curacao. So yeah, the Caribbean Cup, it's going to be taking place on the 22nd to 25th of June. It should be really exciting. There was talk that it might be held in the US for a few months, but that never materialized. But what I'm going to find, I think, really interesting is how these teams are going to strike a balance between the Caribbean Cup and Gold Cup, because there isn't a lot of time, really, between the Caribbean Cup finishing and then the Gold Cup starting. Because, of course, the Gold Cup kicks off, I think, on the 7th of July. Will these Caribbean nations, particularly Jamaica, will they call up the European-based players like Wes Morgan, Michael Hector, Adrian Mariappa, Gareth McCleary? Will these guys come in for the Caribbean Cup? Will they save them for the Gold Cup? So there's that to look at. But the Caribbean Cup, all in all, it's still quite a tournament that's not really known about, I think, in a global context. It's still got a long way to go in terms of marketing and raising the profile of it. And I think something that's helped with that is in 2014, the president of the CFU, Gordon Derrick, he made sure that the Caribbean Cup was played on FIFA international dates. So what this allowed teams to do is call upon players that are contracted to clubs overseas. And it's really boosted the quality ever since, I think.
And so just out of curiosity, for these countries, especially for French Guiana and Martinique, who said are non-FIFA members, I would think this is like the big tournament. But for a team like Jamaica, who's regularly playing in the Hex or in the Gold Cup, is it still a big deal to win? I would think.
No, absolutely, it's a very big deal, and let's not forget Jamaica. They made the final 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. When they started to bring it up, they beat the US along the way in the semi-finals. And then lost out to Mexico, but they actually became the first Caribbean island to reach the Gold Cup final. So it's a big deal for Jamaica, but even more so, as you say, for the non-FIFA members. There's a great quote from the French Guyanese goalkeeper Donovan Leon, who said that the Gold Cup for them is their World Cup, and I think that for me just hit home how important it is. It's a huge opportunity for the players to kind of put French Guiana on the map, I think. And, also some of the locally based players that often don't get many opportunities to play on a stage, where they're going to be playing 20,000, 30,000, maybe more fans. It's really a good platform, I think, to kind of showcase their skills.
Reed, do you have anything? You haven't spoken yet.
Yeah, just back onto the diaspora part of it all. What I find very interesting is that we've kind of seen a bit of a revival of African football with the likes of, most notably, Wilfred Zaha switching back to Cote d'Ivoire, and the likes of Kalishi Iheanacho, Alex Iwobi, all who had the opportunity to declare for England or other places, other examples like that, but are choosing to play for Nigeria. Whereas in the Caribbean football, I've noticed it's kind of the reverse of that lately, meaning English players who are from, as a result of the diaspora, playing for some of these lower profile Caribbean nations as internationals rather than trying to hold hope and wait out an England call-up, which will probably never come. Do you think major players who are from those nations or as a result of the diaspora be kind of a reversal where they are choosing to go for their Caribbean teams rather than fairly likely England call-ups? What shoots to mind immediately is a West Ham supporter, Mikel Antonio, declined a Jamaican call-up because he was holding out for an England call-up. Do you think we'll ever see someone like Mikel Antonio deny an England call-up for a Jamaica call-up?
Possibly. I think there are a lot more examples of players that were born in England and have played, or the UK, and have played for Caribbean nation of their family, thanks to their family ancestry, over somebody like Antonio, somebody like, I don't know, who's born in England and has played for a Caribbean nation. Raheem Sterling is a good example, I suppose. Somebody that's born in Jamaica and went on to play for England. But Jamaica have had various rejections. You know, it's not just Michael Antonio, Wayne Routledge, I think Nathan Dyer, Andre Wisdom, Jason Puncheon, Troy Deeney. You know, these are quite high-profile names, all English-born, that have in the past rejected invitations from Jamaica. I do think generally, though, the point on the diaspora, I think why it's so important in the Caribbean particularly is because a lot of these nations, their player pools are pretty low, pretty limited. And if you do have that opportunity to call upon somebody that is likely to have more experience, more professionalism, they're playing, you know, they've grown up in a kind of a different culture and environment, then why wouldn't you do that, you know? Why wouldn't you capitalize on that? And pretty much, I mean, there are 31 members, right, in the Caribbean Football Union. I'd say pretty much every member, bar one or two, they call upon players from the diaspora. It's become a real thing now. I mentioned Curacao, they've done it with Holland. Martinique have done it a lot with France. I mean, you guys might remember Julien Forbert, formerly of Real Madrid and West Ham. You know, he captains Martinique now, and he has done for the last 3 years. So you know, if you can get these guys on board, the experience that they can bring can be really pivotal, I think.
And I think that pointing that out is interesting. Of course, we do have a Caribbean team playing in the hexagonal for a chance at the World Cup in Trinidad and Tobago. So I guess I wanted to get your thoughts about if you think they can catch the likes of Panama and Honduras, and to try to get into that that fourth position where they'll get a playoff. To me, I think that Mexico, the United States, and Costa Rica are the favorites to advance on the automatic bids. And Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, they have games that they can get points from. I think I know they have to play the United States in 2 of their next 3 qualifying matches, which isn't great. But I mean, the United States so often struggles when they're playing on the road. Do you think that TNT has any chance at getting into that World Cup, playoff spot for the qualifying round?
Yeah, I think they do have a chance, and I'm hoping to see them there. Similar to yourself, I mean, I said from the very beginning of the Hex, I think the US, Mexico, and Costa Rica will lock those top 3 spots. If Trinidad and Tobago are going to make it to Russia, I think it will be virtue of the 4th place playoff. It's very much like they got into in 2006 when they beat Bahrain in those 2 legs. And Dennis Lawrence, funnily enough, the player that scored that bullet header to send Trinidad and Tobago to the first World Cup finals, he's now in charge, and what a difference he's made. That they won against Panama. It was a real, it was a real kind of back to the walls performance in the second half. But Kevin Molino, who obviously has been a big player in the American system, he scored the all-important goal. And I thought they were really unlucky against Mexico, actually. Really unlucky. Jovian Jones scored what seemed like a perfectly legitimate goal that was ruled out for offside, and that was kind of quite hard for them to lose that. But yeah, so far, 1 win, 3 defeats. They've got some tough games to come, but I still think it's premature to kiss their campaign goodbye. I really do. And Dennis Lawrence has come in. He's made an impact. He's got some good coaches around him. Sol Campbell's a big name, has come in as assistant. Stern John, Stuart Charles Fevrier has had some success domestically. He's also an assistant. And he's just made them a little bit more well-disciplined, I think, and defensively sound, which they kind of needed. And you can see that against Panama there. I think they were a lot more organised at the back. So it's going to be tough. If not Russia 2018, there is always Qatar 2022. And Lawrence has signed a 3-year contract, I think. So I think the idea is for him to stay on for the next few years and build towards that. But I'm just really excited for 2026, with the World Cup expansion. And I think there's talk that the US, Canada, and Mexico might well triple host that tournament. I think there's an announcement set for Monday from Canada. I think it's a great opportunity, for the Caribbean in particular to up their representation at the World Cup.
So do you think the expanding World Cup will benefit places like the Caribbean? I mean, I guess that was the idea in theory. I mean, sometimes FIFA's theories don't turn out in practice, but do you think that in giving another, decade even to develop further, do you think that when 2026 comes, they'll be able to shine? Some of these countries, Jamaica, Trinidad, Haiti.
Yeah, I mean, a lot can happen in 10 years, but I'm an advocate for the expansion. I think it will benefit more kind of CONCACAF, Africa, Asia, more so than Europe. And I know there was some disgruntlement from UEFA about it. But if you look historically, the Caribbean for me has been massively underrepresented at the World Cup finals. For me, there is no reason why a Caribbean country cannot make the World Cup every 4-year cycle. You had Cuba in 1938, Haiti in 1974, Jamaica in 98, and then Trinidad and Tobago, as I was saying earlier, in 2006. But, it's been a long time since we've had a Caribbean nation at the World Cup. So I think having the expansion, it will have a massive psychological incentive, a boost for Caribbean nations. And I've been speaking to a couple of chief of member associations like Chini Joseph, who's the president of the Grenada FA. And he was saying that they're already planting the seeds now for 2026. They're strategically looking at it. What sort of players could make up the squad for 2026? Let's kind of get rid of the older players maybe now and look to usher in, new blood that will be available. But certainly, I think the expansion will help the Caribbean. It's been proposed, hasn't it? The slots that CONCACAF will get six automatic. And then there's going to be a 16 playoff tournament. As I said before, a lot can change in a decade, but you would think that the US, Mexico, Costa Rica, Honduras would qualify automatically. Wait and see whether the US, Mexico, and Canada co-host. But it was an interesting thing on Twitter the other day that looked at the FIFA rankings for March, which teams from CONCACAF would actually qualify for the World Cup. And Jamaica would miss out, believe it or not. Haiti would have gone through automatically. Curacao and St. Kitts and Nevis would have got into the playoffs. Jamaica wouldn't have been in there, and Trinidad and Tobago wouldn't have been in there, traditional powers. So I think that was quite interesting.
Staying with the theme of expansion, you touched on it earlier with the Caribbean nations wanting to get their own football federation. Do you think that having an expanded World Cup could kind of help that bid? Because I don't know, now that it's going to change the way that qualification works so much, do you think that it could help them get their own federation? I know that we've seen like the rise of the Oceania Federation and then kind of its fall with Australia leaving to go to Asia. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think one of the, if not the main motivating factors behind the Caribbean Football Union going independent is to get guaranteed World Cup representation. Because if they split away from CONCACAF and they became the 7th confederation within FIFA, they would have to have either a kind of a playoff spot or guaranteed representation, and obviously that's a very attractive thing for a lot of the Caribbean nations. But I think if you look at CONCACAF generally now, though, if the Caribbean wants to get into the World Cup, then for me, I'm almost seeing a Caribbean Football Union splitting away as a bit of a cop-out in a way. You know, what I think I'd quite like to see is them to stay in CONCACAF and earn their place on merit. You know, try and get past Panama, try and get past Honduras, you know, and make progress that way, rather than, you know, necessarily splitting off and getting representation through that way.
No, that's an interesting point. Do you think that FIFA would ever get so adventurous to have like a Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, Haiti, I don't know who else you could throw in there, like triple or quadruple bid to host?
Get out of here.
You never know. You never know. I mean, there has been some rumours before that the Caribbean could potentially host the Gold Cup because, you know, like the Gold Cup is pretty much always held in the United States, isn't it? Yeah. And look, I can understand from a CONCACAF perspective, revenue, the infrastructure, the stadiums there. I mean, you certainly get a carnival atmosphere if it was held in the Caribbean.
It'd be terrific.
Yeah,
it'd be so fun to go to.
It would be, and you know, I'm sure the atmosphere would be great. But realistically speaking, is the infrastructure there? Like at the moment, no, I don't think so. There's a lot of cricket stadiums because cricket is so popular across the islands. And yeah, I think it was the 2007 Cricket World Cup was held in the Caribbean, and there was a lot of stadiums built for that. But like a lot of national teams still, they play on cricket pitches. You know, Antigua do this, and Vincent and the Grenadines do this. Various Caribbean nations do. So that would have to be addressed. But the Bahamas, believe it or not, are hosting the FIFA Beach Soccer World Cup. That's to be played later this month. I think it kicks off on the 27th of April. So, you know, let's see what unfolds there. If the Bahamas can do a good job of that, you know, hospitality and making sure everything runs smoothly, then, you know, that might kind of set a precedent for the actual World Cup played on grass for the Caribbean.
Yeah. Favorite CONCACAF conspiracy theories is that during the Gold Cup, the last Gold Cup, with the Trinidad and Tobago, Mexico, Jamaica, or with Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica possibly making up a final, my conspiracy theory that instantly came into my head and never left was that CONCACAF referees that either the U.S. or Mexico have to go into that final to make revenue goals. And I want to know if you think that has any credence to it, because I'm totally convinced that those very questionable calls that Mexico got throughout the last 45 minutes of that match were one-in-one related to the amount of televisions that would be watching that final if it was Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago. And
then I have a more serious version of that question once you're done.
Are you referring to the Mexico-Panama semi-final? Because that was very controversial. Trinidad and Tobago played them in the quarters.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, apologies.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch the Mexico-Panama semi-final, but I do remember it being very, very controversial. Panama were absolutely up in arms about it, weren't they? That Mexico had gone through, and obviously the United States were in the final. I can see kind of where you're coming from. I think what also confuses me about, which might fuel your conspiracy even more, Reed, is that why is the Gold Cup, right? Why is the Gold Cup draw not made public? Why is it done behind closed doors? I can't understand why that is. You know, usually it would be streamed. You get to see, you know, who's seeded, the pots and whatnot. But it seems to me like, I don't know, it's slightly suspicious to me that the Gold Cup draw isn't you know, televised or isn't streamed. And people often say to me on social media, this is just helping the US, this is just helping Mexico, because the North American bloc, they do bring in the most revenue, don't they, for CONCACAF? I think I read a stat that 91% of CONCACAF's revenue is generated by the United States and Mexico alone.
Just because I have the bracket up right now. Mexico went through after extra time in the quarters and the semis, both very contentious and highly stressful. And interestingly enough, there was some television data that came out a couple days ago, and television numbers and stadium filled, Mexico and the United States are two of the top, 7 to 5, depending on how you want to count it, in the world of just viewership. So I think it's definitely the case that we see, and CONCACAF in the Caribbean or FIFA even in the Caribbean have a very storied and questionable history. So I think I'm not going to let this go, and you're only fueling my very much so deep-seated belief. Andrew, would you like to try to bring back the professionalism level to this interview?
Yeah, well, and I think we're running a little low on time, so I'll just kind of wrap it up with this question. But moving forward, without conspiracy theories, just because of how much money the U.S. and Mexico, and then potentially in the next decade, if Canada grows, Canada rake in for CONCACAF. Do you think there's kind of a natural, and this might fuel discussion for a separate federation, but a natural ceiling that exists kind of for Caribbean teams because, it's so hard to make the case, they're not as sexy, they're not going to, sell out 30,000 person stadiums, for something like hosting the Gold Cup. So do you think that there's kind of that natural barrier that exists? They're kind of the bête noire of CONCACAF, even though they make up 3/4 of the membership.
Undeniably, there is a barrier. The key thing for me in terms of how do we break down that barrier is professionalism. Because if you look at it so the CONCACAF Champions League in the 70s and 80s, the Caribbean clubs, they were enjoying success there. And I think what's happened is over the decades, Mexico, the US, Canada, Central America, even Costa Rica, Honduras, Guatemala, to an extent, have moved forward, and professionalism has been a big part of that. And the Caribbean has kind of lagged behind a little bit, particularly domestically. So how do we close the gap? How do, you talked about a glass ceiling there. How do we move forward and try and break down that barrier? I honestly think just making football in the Caribbean professional would go a long way to closing the gap. Because there is a lot of talent, a lot of raw talent in the Caribbean. And I think often the thing that lets them down domestically and internationally is just that lack of professionalism, and the fact that a lot of players, they work 9 till 5, they're not there's not a lot of professional football opportunities in the Caribbean itself. There are only kind of Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Dominican Republic that actually have professional setups. So I think that's a big thing, and also exporting more Caribbean players elsewhere, abroad, particularly to the MLS, because I think the MLS has had a very good, profound impact actually on the development of Caribbean players. You think of Joevin Jones, Osvaldo Alonso, Alvis Powell, Atiba Harris, even from St Kitts and Nevis, that have all played in MLS. So just marketing Caribbean players, getting them out there a little bit more, and then when they come back to play in the Caribbean, that should raise the game and the standards.
Okay, I lied. I actually have one more question. So I really enjoyed, and I think it was from either a year or 2 years ago, your YouTube video series looking at kind of the next crop of Caribbean talent, which we can re-put in the show notes.
Thank you.
So moving forward, especially as fans of MLS, who do you think are some of the young players that teams should be keeping an eye on, and fans should be kind of licking their chops and maybe we can recruit to bring into MLS, and thinking guys like Kevin Molino, who you mentioned earlier, who have played pretty much their whole career in America, kind of establishing that pipeline.
Joevin Jones.
Joevin Jones is another one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think generally there should be more scouting done across the Caribbean because, as I said before, there's a lot of raw talent, players that can actually be brought for relatively cheap prices and have lots of potential. A few that I've written down. Ronaldo Damus is an up-and-coming Haitian striker. He made his senior debut for Haiti when he was, I think, 16, 17 in a World Cup qualifier. And he played at the recent CONCACAF Under-20 Championship. Jeremy Garrett is one that's up and coming from Guyana. He's 17. He had a trial at Sporting Lisbon Academy last year, and he's all set to go back to Sporting Lisbon later this year. And he speaks very well, very, very level-headed kid. Shamar Nicholson is another one from Jamaica who's still a teenager, and I think he's been overtaken now, but at one point recently he was the top scorer in the Jamaican Premier League, which is no mean feat given his age. And a player that really impressed me at the CONCACAF Under-20 Championship was Cathon Saint-Hilaire, who plays for St Anne's Rangers in Trinidad and Tobago. He's a winger, like an inside forward, and he scored 2 goals for Trinidad and Tobago at that championship, played in February, one of which was like his first touch coming off the bench. And he did so well, impressed so much that Dennis Lawrence actually invited him into senior national team training ahead of the World Cup qualifiers. So there are a few more. Aneko Lowe from Bermuda, he's just been signed by New York Cosmos B team, who I think play in the 4th tier in the US. There's Mackinson Cadet from Turks and Caicos Islands. There were quite a few teenagers from the Caribbean, that are up and coming. I would just stress, though, I think there needs to be more scouting, particularly from the American market, because there's the rewards that can be reaped.
No, undoubtedly. Well, Nathan, thank you very much for joining the podcast today. We really appreciate your time.
Where can they find? So our listeners now, they're very hyped about Caribbean football. Now, where can they find you to get their fix?
This is the important part, isn't it? Thank you very much for having me on the show. My site is www.thehomeofcaribbeanfootball.com. I'm on Twitter at Caribbean Football. Football is abbreviated to FTBL. On Instagram as well, same username. On Facebook. So yeah, I mean, if you're interested, you want to find out a bit more, got any questions, any queries, then I'm always happy to kind of reply on social media. And this summer, I'm looking to bring out quite a lot of content, Caribbean football content on my website. So, different stories I've got in the pipeline. So, please do stay tuned. And thanks very much again for having me on the show. Yeah,
well, I think it would make sense. Maybe if you enjoyed your experience, we might want to have you back on for Caribbean Cup Gold Cup talk at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I love that.
That'd be great. Thank you very much for joining the show.
No, thank you. Take care.